Hello everyone, I'm Don Arleth and welcome to World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm pleased to kick off our new flagship roundup of the most important stories from Poland and the region, followed up by an in-depth interview with policymakers and leading analysts. Tonight we'll be talking with Poland's finance minister, Andrzej Domański, about the challenges of financing the increased military spending while keeping the budget deficit under control. But before we get started, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Donald Trump escapes an assassination attempt and heads to Milwaukee to become the Republican Party's official candidate for president. The first meeting of the European Parliament and the first key decisions. Will women take the lead in the EU? Is Poland's previous government guilty of abusing power and siphoning off state funds? The current administration in Warsaw believes that the answer is yes and has detained a former justice minister. Following Saturday's attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump, some commentators are saying the attack is likely to deepen the entrenched political polarization of America. The event has also reportedly boosted the odds of his victory in November's elections. It is thought that a second term for Trump would likely increase political instability, with potentially major consequences for Ukraine and the region of Central and Eastern Europe.
FBI agents searched the home of the gunman who aimed and failed to kill former President Donald Trump. They're hunting for a motive behind 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks's actions. Commentators say the assassination attempt will fuel political division in the States, and if Trump returns to the White House, will also increase instability.
Take a look at what happened.
Trump supporters have talked about persecuting his rivals. The former president has called for the jailing of election officials who he believes mishandled the 2020 election, and proposed dragging his political rival, Liz Cheney, before a military tribunal. Acts such as these could usher in political instability for the next decade, with consequences for Ukraine and the Central and Eastern Europe region.
I still think that Joe Biden is the best American president we had in a long time, and he's a great president for Poland, for Europe, for Ukraine. I think the situation would be much worse if it was not for Joe Biden.
Ukraine's President Zelensky said he would work with Trump if he's elected.
I understand the general outlook on things. I believe that if Mr. Trump becomes president, we'll work together. I'm not afraid of this. Ukrainians are free and emotional, and when there's uncertainty, the Republican Party is diverse. There are hawks whose messages are more right, more radical. But I want to tell you that the majority of the Republican Party supports Ukraine and its people.
A second Trump term may not see some of the threats made in opposition come to pass. It will, though, likely see greater instability, which Ukraine and the CEE region must prepare for.
Women set to take the lead in the European Union. Tomorrow, the European Parliament convenes for the first time since the elections over a month ago. And the top jobs will go to, well, we can assume that resigning today as Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, will take the reins as the EU's top diplomat. Roberta Metsola looks set to head the European Parliament, and Ursula von der Leyen could serve another term as President of the European Commission. But will she get enough votes tomorrow to secure the job? Now let's go to our correspondent in Strasbourg, Sasha Farbach, to find out. Hello, Sasha. So what are the chances that these ladies are going to take the top 3 jobs of 4 in the European Union?
Yeah, good evening, Don. Now, indeed, 3 ladies at the very top of the European Union. Now, let's start with the ones that are more fixed and shoe-in. Tomorrow, as you already mentioned, it's Tuesday. It's the opening of the plenary here behind me in Strasbourg, and that will bring all the new MEPs, 720 of them, to vote on their new head, their new president of the parliament. That's going to likely be, barring any sort of, let's say, circumstances, Roberta Metsola from Malta. Now, she hails from the EPP group. She's very popular. She's already headed the parliament for some time, since 2022. That 2.5-year term is pretty much hers for a qualified majority. It's over 50% of the vote. And I think that's going to be a done deal there tomorrow here. That'll kick off things. They're also going to be deciding on various vice presidents, 14 of them, and that's going to be aligned proportionally by various political parties. And let's start with the second one as well. Another woman at the helm, Kaja Kallas, very popular from Estonia. She resigned today as prime minister. Now, that was something that we'd heard of already, that was in the cards, preparing herself for that role. Now, that is not a done deal. I mean, ultimately, she's a former MEP, by the way. She'll still have to be grilled and vetted here by MEPs behind me, looking into September and October time. Now, the one outlier here is Ursula von der Leyen. Now, she's been calling pretty much everybody in her notebook, trying to get every single vote. She's 361. That's what she needs. Now, the reason why it's so panicky is she just passed with about 9 votes last time around 5 years ago, and she needs to get that. And this is a secret ballot, Dawn, so that means that you don't know who's voting for who. There's probably going to be attrition in her own party, and those coalitions, the EPP, plus those partners that she has through the Socialists and Democrats and also Renew. Now she's also counting on some of the biggest losers who become the kingmakers, Renew, which lost several seats in the last parliament election, as well as now the Greens. Now they're going to have their own demands, so it's going to be a really tight race, a really tight vote, and it's not guaranteed. So we asked around and we said, well, is there a plan B? And what we're hearing so far from Brussels and here to Strasbourg, there is no plan B, and it would offset a institutional crisis is what they're calling it, which means that everyone's got to go back to the drawing board, which means the entire package of those women goes out of the window. We come back to Brussels, where leaders of the European Union have to come back with new names. Now it's Antonio Costa, former Prime Minister of Portugal, who's supposed to be Council President. Now that's already a done deal, but there's no plan B. Let's see what happens tomorrow with Tuesday, Roberta Metsola first, and then on Thursday, it's crunch time with Ursula von der Leyen. So still a lot of very interesting hours and days ahead until we get that news. Back to you, Don.
Certainly some interesting developments there. Will keep us on the edge of our seats. Sasha Farbach reporting from Strasbourg. Thank you. In a backlash over Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's travels to Moscow and Beijing, the European Union has snubbed Hungary's plans to hold a foreign ministers summit in August by organizing their own meeting elsewhere. This is a response to Orban's embrace of the Kremlin's narrative in a meeting with Vladimir Putin earlier this month. So will the EU Foreign Ministers Summit suck the air out of Budapest's plans? Karolina Stoltzman has the details in her report.
Viktor Orban, self-proclaimed peacemaker, is on a mission. The Hungarian Prime Minister recently visited Moscow and Beijing. The controversial visits took place without the backing of the EU and NATO.
It was a self-decided and self-managed peace mission without the alliance, EU and NATO.
Orban faced heavy criticism for openly flouting EU policies, especially now when Hungary currently holds the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union.
First point, the rotating presidency doesn't represent the EU at the external level. This is a clear position, and this visit paid by the Prime Minister of Hungary was not a visit on behalf of the EU.
In response to Orban's actions, EU foreign ministers have decided to boycott the Budapest summit in August, deepening the growing gap between Hungary and the EU. Wojciech Przybylski, editor-in-chief of Visegrad Inside, says that Orban has become isolated on the international stage.
Prime Minister Orban became irrelevant in NATO. He's merely a proxy of a proxy. He's a proxy of Russia. Russia is a proxy of China.
Péter Balázs, former European Commissioner, says Orban's recent visit could impact Ukraine.
Orban has no plan whatsoever, so some speculations said that maybe he has a genius plan to solve the situation. This is not the case. He is quite simply representing the Russian position.
Europe continues to grapple with the fallout of Orban's unsanctioned diplomatic tour. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell is expected to summon the ministers to a formal Foreign Affairs Council at the same time as Orban's summit. Reportedly, there have also been talks of Hungary's presidency of the Council of the European Union coming to an earlier stop in the wake of Orban's actions.
The fourth edition of the European Political Community, an event bringing together nearly 50 European leaders, will take place in England at Blenheim Palace this coming Thursday. This will be a unique opportunity for new Prime Minister Keir Starmer to present a more hopeful vision of the EU's future and switch gears in the UK-EU relations. Now, to talk about how he could achieve this and the importance of the summit, we're now joined by our UK correspondent, Claudia Czerwinska, who will attend the upcoming EPC summit later this week. Hello, Claudia. Now, what's the importance of the forum and how is Keir Starmer planning to woo EU leaders?
Good evening, Don. So just a quick word of introduction. The EPC, this is the fourth edition, is an event which was a response of the European political community to the illegal invasion of Ukraine in 2022 by Russia. This was an event that was first initiated by French President Emmanuel Macron, and the first edition took place in Czech Republic, following in Moldova and in Spain. This meeting in Blenheim Palace, which I'm going to attend on Thursday and I'm going to report from since the early morning hours until the evening, is incredibly important because this is the first chance of Keir Starmer to actually, on his own turf, introduce himself to nearly 50 European leaders. This meeting is also incredibly important because this was something that former Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, was not very fond of. He was asking question whether or not the political world needs another political forum. But this is going to be a wonderful opportunity for the Prime Minister, the UK Prime Minister, to talk about disinformation, the lack of energy security, and immigration.
Okay, we'll be looking forward to that. Claudia Czerwinska reporting to us live from London. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Authorities in Poland have arrested former Deputy Justice Minister Marcin Romanowski, charging him with 11 counts, including involvement in organized crime. Under the previous Law and Justice administration, he was in charge of the Justice Fund, which prosecutors say was used as a multi-million euro slush fund to finance campaign events for the then ruling party. One of Donald Tusk's primary election promises last year was to hold those officials accountable for their responsibility in abusing power.
3 days after he was stripped of his parliamentary immunity, opposition MP Marcin Romanowski was arrested.
The prosecution believes that the evidence gathered over a 3-month period sufficiently justifies a suspicion that the MP has committed at least 11 crimes, including involvement in an organized criminal group.
The charges are linked to the misuse of funds from the Justice Fund, which used money obtained from convicted offenders to aid victims of crime and help resocialize former convicts.
There are a lot of evidence stating that the money, instead of being directed to the organizations which really aim to help the victims of the crimes, they were directed to the organizations which were closely linked to the ruling political party.
Funds were mainly dispensed during election years 2019, 2020 and 2023. Money was disbursed in constituencies where candidates of the junior coalition partner Sovereign Poland stood to win the elections.
This is nothing more than a cheap show because we all know that on Friday, when the immunity of MP Romanowski was lifted, he reported to the prosecutor's office and the prosecution wasn't ready.
The motion to strip Romanowski of his immunity wasn't just supported by the ruling coalition. Most of the MPs of the far-right confederation voted in favor.
This is not about opposition. It is about one member of parliament and his acts as a Deputy Minister of Justice.
We as a Chamber of Parliament have simply decided that in this case, the same thing that would happen to a regular citizen must happen to Mr. Romanowski. The same provisions must be used against an MP and a regular citizen.
This may not be the last arrest in connection to the Justice Fund scandal. Before Marcin Romanowski, it was Michał Woś, also a Deputy Minister of Justice, former Deputy Minister of Justice, who had been stripped of his parliamentary immunity. He, in turn, approved the decision to buy Pegasus spyware by the Central Anti-Corruption Bureau for millions of euro using the Justice Fund. Marek Steele, TVP World.
And that's not all here on World News Tonight. Still ahead on the program. Ukraine seeks more security agreements to shore up defense. The Lukashenko regime remains merciless against political opposition and dissent. And now we turn our focus to Ukraine. In order to keep up the fight against the invading Russians, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is seeking to sign new security arrangements with 9 more countries. That's according to comments made earlier today. Our Ukraine correspondent Oz Chatterjee joins us live in Kiev with the latest. Hello, Oz. Now, what more can you tell us about these security agreements? We know that Ukraine's trying to sign as many as it can.
Good evening. Yeah, it's an interesting development. These comments were given by President Zelensky today in a wide-ranging press conference. You heard earlier on the show the comments he made about President Trump. This was a more broader comment about these bilateral security agreements. Ukraine has been signing a lot of these recently. They've signed 23 to date. And now Zelensky indicated that they're seeking to sign at least 9 more. Now, some of the interesting countries that were lined up and mentioned in a statement he released on Telegram yesterday evening, talking about Czechia, Slovenia, and Ireland. Ireland's an interesting one there because they have a neutral foreign policy stance. So this would be an interesting security agreement signed with Ireland. We believe that at least $38 billion to date are the total cost of some of these agreements so far. So hopefully more in the pipeline for Ukraine from there.
Certainly. Well, Oz Chatterjee joining us live from Kyiv. We appreciate your report. Now, when we talk about military spending, few would guess that Poland tops the list of NATO countries, at least in terms of percentage of GDP. Poland is once again outdoing itself, though, and could spend a whopping 5% of GDP on defense in 2025. But can it afford to do so? Already, Poland is posting a budget deficit of 5.1% this year. This exceeds European Union guidelines. Now, our reporter John Todd explains what options Warsaw will have to make this record spending a reality.
Poland's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Radosław Sikorski, said at last week's NATO summit that Warsaw will spend 5% of economic output on defence next year. Statista forecasts Poland's 2025 gross domestic product at more than $884 billion, meaning some $44 billion on military spending. Preliminary figures from Poland's National Statistics Office show the general government deficit reached 5.1% of Poland's GDP in 2023. This has prompted the European Commission to launch an excessive deficit procedure against Poland. Poland is not alone here, with the EC mulling opening excessive debt procedures for Belgium, France, Italy, Hungary, Malta and Slovakia.
Obviously, there is no risk for the Polish debt at that moment. Obviously, there is no risk with running even relatively high deficit if necessary this year. But I'm absolutely sure that Poland should start reducing the deficit over the years to come.
The planned increase in defence spending comes as Poland battles Belarus's hybrid war on the European Union's eastern border. And the Kremlin's war in Ukraine continues to pose a security threat.
And now joining us here on TVP World and World News Tonight to discuss these economic dilemmas and exactly how to combine the reductions in the budget deficit, which at the end of June amounted to approximately 17.5 billion euros, with higher defense spending, is Polish Minister of Finance Andrzej Domański. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us on World News tonight.
Great to be here.
Now, starting off here, I believe you have some information for us that was just published. What are your expectations for Poland's economic growth just this year and in 2025?
We expect that the Polish economy will grow this year by 3.1%. And this is a substantial change since last year, when actually the Polish economy grew by 0.2%. So we are really accelerating. But what is, I believe, more important is that in next year, we expect the Polish economy to grow by 3.7%. So Poland will be back among the fastest growing economies in the whole European Union.
Which is a good record to have. Now, this week, Poland may be put under the EU's excessive deficit procedure, along with a few other member states. It has to spend around 3%, right? So what measures are you planning to reduce the deficit in the coming years? How much can you reduce the deficit on an annual basis? Some media outlets mention 0.8% of GDP. And finally, it's a triply loaded question. Will plans to raise the excise tax on alcohol and cigarettes, how much will that really achieve?
Okay, so last year, the deficit in Poland was 5.1%, so it was substantially above the 3% level. So actually the European Commission was obliged to open the excess deficit procedure for Poland. And currently we are in the dialogue with Commission to discuss the trajectory of cutting this deficit, and we are pretty optimistic. It's worth to notice that our budget incomes are really improving. Just 2 hours ago, we have published our data for June, and just in June, the VAT tax collection went up by 30%, 3-0. So it's really
year on year.
Year on year, of course. Mm-hmm. So it's a really good figure, and I do believe that because of accelerating economy, there will be no necessary for any substantial cuts in our spending. So far, the Polish economy is the main engine of Polish economy is the retail consumption. As you know, we made quite substantial increase in salaries for teachers, for public workers, and we see that people are spending more. What we still lack is more investments, but I do believe that in the second half of this year, and for sure in 2025, we'll see a quite substantial growth in investments as well. So basically, we are really optimistic about the Polish economy. We see that engines start to work, and therefore we expect that 2025 will be even better.
Even better. Well, and inflation is coming down, so that's also important here. Also sort of locks in some of the growth there. Now, what if economic growth comes in at a lower rate than expectations and say much less than 3% of GDP? Then what?
Actually, I do believe that there is rather an upside risk from our current forecast of 3.1.
That is too hot.
I think that 3.1 is safe, and if I had to bet, I would rather say that we'll see something 3.3 rather than something below 3%. So we feel very safe, very comfortable with our current forecast. As I said, we see that income to the budget are improving. Not only VAT tax, but also personal income tax is much better than a year ago, and therefore we see that our public finances is pretty sound, and that's of course very optimistic. So this is also why I believe that next year the Polish economy will start to to grow even at a higher pace.
Well, we all have our hopes up for sure. Now that brings us to the 5%. This projected to increase record high defense spending from 4% to even higher spending at 5%. Minister Sikorski, Minister Kosiniak-Kamysz say that Poland need to do this. Now, how can this be achieved without significantly raising taxes, or at least from the government revenue side, increasing the amount that the government's taking in?
Sure. We see the situation in Ukraine, and we all know that the threat from Russia is really a substantial one. So this is why we have to spend a lot on defense. And currently Poland spends 4.1% of our GDP on defense, which is the highest among all NATO members. And it will stay like that. I mean, at least at this level, but we will, next year, I see that spending on defense in our country will grow also, not only in the nominal terms, but also as a share of GDP. And this is why it's so important to accelerate the economy so that we can collect more taxes. But we see an inflow of foreign investors, new greenfield investments in our economy. We see that Poland is that we benefit a lot from the processes like nearshoring, friendshoring, and of course on the October 15th, the date of the last parliamentary election, Poland made a very decisive U-turn back to the European values. We made a U-turn from what I call a Hungarian path. So this is why more and more foreign investors are interested in investing in our country, which I believe is the best place to invest in Europe right now.
Yeah, certainly. So business confidence among manufacturing companies seems to be low, and exports are not growing as fast as they did, at least in the past. Why is the industrial output not recovering, say, faster? We also see the need for weapons for Ukraine, ammunition, heavy equipment, and we see some areas of possible joint production or manufacturing capabilities here in Poland. So I guess, to what extent is the hawkish attitude of the National Bank of Poland detrimental to the economic growth by limiting credit and marking the zloty as overvalued?
I'm the Minister of Finance, so for me it's very important to maintain the independence of the central bank, and I never comment on central bank moves and the interest rate policy. That's very important for me. Also because the foreign investors, it's important for them to maintain this independence of the central bank.
So you're not going to tell me whether the Monetary Policy Council should lower interest rates?
No, definitely I will not.
All right, well, I had to give it a try.
Having said that, what I can say is that, of course, there are some headwinds for Polish economy. The situation in Ukraine is for sure one of them. The very sluggish recovery in Eurozone countries is for sure another issue. We see very weak data from German economy recently. Industrial production down by 8 or even 9%, which is really a problem. And also for Polish companies, as Germany is our biggest trade partner. So this is, of course, another issue. And strong zloty is not helping our exporters. Since October 15th, Polish zloty has strengthened a lot, and we see that some export-oriented companies see it as a problem. But Minister of Finance is not interfering in currency.
In an interview here on TVP World, prominent Polish economist Witold Orłowski suggested that the political motives may be behind the central bank's decision not to cut interest rates. You just mentioned, I think, the reason why it can be detrimental to Polish business. Do you think that what do you think is
Sure. So the central bank is independent. And we see that and we are not, as a Minister of Finance, I'm not making any comments on their decisions.
Your government has heavily accused the governor of the central bank of politicizing the policies at the central bank.
True, that's true, but me, as a Minister of Finance, I do not comment on that. I believe it's very, very important to maintain this independence. It's also very important that inflation in Poland is going down. The recent print of 2.6%, whereas just a year ago, maybe a bit more than a year ago, we had a consumer price index growth of close to 19%. So we see that inflation is going down, and it's also helping.
And basic economics tells you that when the inflation goes down, then the rates should go down as well.
As I said many times this evening, I will not comment on central bank policy.
Okay, well, let's move on. The government has managed to unblock billions of euros from the EU. When do you expect the impact from those funds to somehow stimulate growth, and how significant will that growth be? And where are the critical areas that this money will make a difference?
Sure. We promised during the election campaign that we will unblock the EU funds to Polish economy, and we did. I mean, Prime Minister Tusk went to Brussels and very quickly managed to bring those funds to Poland, and this money starts to work. I do expect the main impact of those funds to be seen in 2025. Actually, we estimate that our GDP will be about 0.8% higher thanks to those assets. But it's very, very important to notice that Poland is now is a big and important economy, and the funds from EU, of course, are very welcome, but we need to find other engines for our economy. This is why the green energy transition is so important. Digitalization of economy is so important. We cannot rely anymore on EU funds as a very important source of Poland and Polish economy success.
Right, and especially in light of the increasing energy demands that we have. Now, Poland is the biggest country in the region outside of the Eurozone. What is a realistic framework for Poland to adopt the single currency, in your opinion, and what conditions have to be met?
I mean, currently there are no works and no discussion about adopting euro in Poland. We think there are many reasons to be a bit cautious in this issue. Of course, there are some arguments for, some arguments against, but as I said, we are not working right now about that.
Polish Finance Minister Andrzej Domański, thank you very much for joining us on TVP World tonight. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again tomorrow night. Good night.